Yay. Hi, I'm Dr. Nicola Dellinger, and I am here with Sarah Klein.
Hello,
Hi.
thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you back. Yay! So Sarah is a nutrition health coach and a yogini extraordinaire, and we're really blessed to have her. And part of the reason I invited her here is because we've had so many conversations in this group, in this connectivity group, about the inner critic and how it is really holding us back from shining our light and being our biggest, baddest self. I was in yoga class with Sarah a couple of months ago, and she was actually talking about the inner critic from the perspective of the Yoga Sutras, which are hundreds of years old. And I was like, what? This has been going on, this has been written about since words were written.
Yeah.
So I really I'm so glad you're here to help us understand, how this is part of the human condition and been written about forever, and then how the yoga tradition actually kind of invites us to be with ourselves in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad to be having this conversation. I always like to kind of paint the picture that yoga is a baby in the United States. It's in its infancy. In India, it's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years. The Yoga Sutras, although I always kind of joke that yoga philosophy and the direct history of yoga is kind of like the game of telephone. Like, my teacher told me this, and then my teacher told me that. And there's a lot of magical stories within yoga of how the text came about. But we actually just Googled it because I was like, I don't remember when the sutras were written. I know it was a long time ago, but we're talking about 400 BC. This text was written. And all of yoga philosophy, why it's so fascinating is it has such relevance in our everyday world here when we have these iPhones, we have computers, we're about to have cars that fly, it feels like, right? And we can still look at these texts and get vast wisdom from them. And it's time tested. So this stuff has been around for thousands of years.
Literally.
And it's been improving people's lives. So so why I say yoga is in its infancy is because in our modern day yoga world, when someone says, oh, I'm going to a yoga class, you automatically think of the asana, the postures. And we have really clung on to that at this point in time. And I think for good reason. We definitely needed that. We needed the physical, tangible aspects. But there's so much more to yoga. And just to kind of scratch the surface, the Yoga Sutras tell us to follow an 8-limbed path of yoga. So there's 8 aspects of this practice. And one of those practices is the postures. One.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, and if you go into the Yoga Sutras, it actually uses the word asana, which is often thought of as posture, is actually translated into seat. And so the intention of the posture, doesn't matter if you're in a seated meditation pose or in triangle pose, the intention of the posture is to find comfort and ease so that you can create a space to spontaneously move into a state of meditation. To really the poses become a container to get to know the self. And so if we were to look at the Yoga Sutras and kind of get to the base of, okay, well, what is yoga? So yoga, the word yoga translates into yoke, often thought of as unifying the mind, body, and spirit, becoming one with this package. And then the deeper we dig into the philosophy of yoga and the deeper we go on our own into the practice, it really just reveals itself. That's the beauty of yoga is we show up, do the work, and then the yoga does us. Even when we're not ready.
Great.
Yeah, it does. It truly does.
Awesome.
It's a science. You can get a PhD in India in yoga. It's a science. So where was I going with that? So it means just take your seat. And so what is yoga? So I said kind of the unification of mind, body, and spirit, and then the deeper we go, it's really the unification of all things. So union with the divine, universe, God, whatever you want to use, whatever word, or unification between us. And this is where we can kind of get into the vrittis, is the Sanskrit word for the chitter chatter of the mind, where often when we get into that inner dialogue and it starts to spiral down, right, then the negative thought patterns, the conditioned habits on thinking, we think we're alone. I'm the only one that feels like this.
I can't tell you how many times people have said that. Like,
all the time.
How did you know that I was thinking that?
So this is the human condition.
Right.
And
All of us.
this is what makes us human. Our dogs, our animals, they don't have this. because they're not human. And it's the human condition. We can just call it that. And so then yoga is saying union of the self, but also union with all things. And its intention is to really break down the ego, which thinks that we are separate. So you think that, I think that this. And so there I am, or whatever it might, alone, exactly. But yoga is saying, let's rid ourselves of the ego and actually realize that we all have these same conditioned thoughts. And then to kind of further that, well, what is yoga? And in the first 4 sutras of yoga philosophy, it tells us right away what it is. And then basically you can think of the yoga sutras as kind of a web, and they're constantly reinforcing each other. Like each one's a thread. And that's actually what it translates into, thread. And you can think of, if you were sewing, with the needle point as one of the sutras, and then all of the wisdom is held in each one. Oh, cool. So each one's an entry point for what is taught within the whole thing.
So you're always going to access what it really is, no matter how you come at it.
Exactly. So I feel like what, I personally do is I keep the sutra book out and I'll just kind of flip open. Of course, you might want to start reading it from cover to cover at some point, but then you can just read one and be like, oh wow, that was a lot to take in for the day. So what is yoga? Yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is the first Yoga Sutra. Yoga is the practice of turning down the volume of the mind. It is ridding or dissolving the fluctuations of the mind. And then the second one says, well, when you do that, and this is why we want to do that, when the volume of the mind, the chitter chatter, is turned down, then the volume of the true self can be illuminated. And therefore the brilliance, the inner knowing that we all have, every single one of us, and actually is the connectivity of all of us, can shine out. And then the fourth sutra and says, but when you don't do that, so when you take on, they often will translate vrittis as mind stuff. So when you take on the chitter chatter, so when you let the chitter chatter lead, then you believe you are the thoughts, the emotions, the negative thought patterns, the negative tendencies. But when you don't do that, then you reside in your inner brilliance. So what yoga philosophy is basically saying is, we show up, we turn down the volume of the mind. As we do that, we can let the true self shine. And when the true self shines, we find the connectivity between all beings. And that's the idea of the oneness or the union of yoga.
So could one of the vrittis be the inner critic, like the part of us that's telling us bad things about it? Yeah, you're not enough, you need to do more, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not lovable.
Yeah, so anything that is running. So what, analogy has kind of worked for me is imagining that you are watching a movie. And if it's a really good movie, and there's like a scary moment or somebody's emotionally getting hurt, you feel that like it's you, right? And you're like, oh, you're crying, whatever the experience is. Don't open her! No, don't leave her! Whatever it is, right? You feel like you are experiencing that. But then you can, turn off the movie and walk away and be like, oh, that was a movie, that wasn't me. So our thoughts can become that same analogy, where often the thoughts are running, and sometimes we're like, oh, that was just a silly dark thought, or oh, that was just a silly thought, when we're in our brilliance and we're like, I am much more than that thought. But when we let the mind take over, then we believe we are the characters in the movie.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Okay. So it's like we get hooked onto the thought, and then that thought creates our words and our actions. Right? And so constantly in yoga, we're looking at that. Yoga is always asking us to notice. And this is also a key point, because yoga never asks us to master. I mean, that is an extremely lofty goal. Even the monks who live in the caves, who eat out of like one rice bowl a day or whatever, like that's a lofty goal of really trying to have no thought form in the mind. The goal of yoga, I think in our modern day world, which we can really absorb and chew on, is this idea that we are noticing the thoughts. So as the thoughts come, we start to have a relationship with them. And then we can, ask ourselves, is that true? Is that real? Is that serving me? Is that toxic to my mind and my body? And that's another point that I definitely wanted to bring up in this, is that yoga uses the word dis-ease, disease, but it breaks it apart, and it believes that all disease starts in the thought patterns. And having thoughts is the human condition, but having the same negative, toxic thoughts on replay all the time is what really impacts the nervous system. And as we all know, when cortisol is running rampant, our stress hormone within our body, disease happens over the long period of time. So yoga asks us, and this is a big tall glass of water, but to take 100% self-responsibility for our thoughts, our actions, and our words. And it also is asking us to not be perfect and not to master, but to explore it and start to notice.
Okay, so it's not about changing those thoughts necessarily, but it's about just becoming more present to them and recognizing them as thoughts separate from self, rather than this is a representation of me.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So where it starts is in noticing. And in my in the nutrition work that I do, I work with people in the idea of starting to notice what the habit is, right? We could go to the refrigerator and be the freezer, and a half pint down of ice cream without even noticing that we're there.
Oh, sure.
Everybody's had that experience.
Right? I'm like, they're single serve.
Yeah.
That's the perfect size.
It wasn't my fault. It was waiting for me. But so in yoga terminology, we call those samskaras conditioned habits. So we can think of all the different conditioned habits that we do and we don't think of. Use the example of sitting in your car and buckling your seatbelt. You probably always reach with the same arm. You probably carry your purse or your grocery bag on the same arm. If you do that over time, there's going to be an imbalance in your physical body.
Sure.
It's the same with the subtle experiences. So you look in the mirror, and every time you look in the mirror, you say something negative about your thighs. Or every time you sit down for a meal, you tell yourself, I shouldn't be eating this. Or every time you have a hard day at work, you go home and overeat. Whatever the relationship it is, yoga is asking us to notice that. That's where change begins, is noticing the conditioned habits or the conditioned thoughts that are constantly happening and driving our ship. And then kind of another yoga philosophy that I always kind of pair up with samskara, or they pair up with samskara. None of this is mine. That's what I love about it. It's been around for thousands of years. Is Maya. And Maya is the sheath of illusion. So if you think of a wedding veil, right? It's this idea that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And again, it's taking 100% self-responsibility. So we see the world through our experiences, through our thoughts, through our conditioned habits. And that idea is that through our practice of yoga, through the process of turning down the volume of the mind so that we can see life as it is and see through that sheath that is caused by our conditioned habits. And that's why yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the process, it's the practice of turning down the volume of the mind so that we can see life clearly and truthfully, and then we can see ourselves truthfully and see our brilliance that gets buried underneath all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we look outside of ourselves to turn that down with alcohol or sugar or over exercise or TV or whatever your...
The escape.
Yeah, whatever your distraction of choice is, right? Absolutely.
Self-medication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Truly.
Yeah, because we don't know, we're not trained in what to do with these thoughts. And so it's like, if I can't get rid of them, I need to suppress them.
Right. And so this is not easy.
How do we start? Give us a roadmap here.
This is not easy. Because all right, so another thing that yoga is constantly saying is to support us in sitting in that which is uncomfortable. And so if you go into any yoga class, they're going to ask you to do the weirdest poses, right? Like here, twist around here, wrap your leg here. And you're like, what? And the intention is that our yoga mats are a place that we can practice this. So we step onto the yoga mat and we put our body and our nervous system, that's the key because it is a science of the nervous system, into these uncomfortable poses. We spike the nervous system. And then we breathe, we relax, and we focus. And we use these tangible tools of the breath because there's an audible breath so that we hear. There's dristi, which is the gaze. We steady the gaze. And all of that is called actually pratyahara, sense internalizing. So it's taking all 5 of the senses and pulling them in to create focus. And so in that process, that drops the nervous system. So then when we're off of the mat in our everyday world and the monster jumps out of the closet and our nervous system spikes, we can feel it spike, and then our subconscious says, oh, turn it down.
Oh, I had no idea.
It's really, the practice of asana is a toning of the nervous system. Oh, and that's why sequence-based practicing, I come from the Ashtanga Vinyasa lineage, there is always a closing sequence, and the whole intention of that closing sequence is to settle the nervous system and prepare it for Shavasana so that it's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, an hour, 45 minutes, however long you're doing it. And that's the training.
Okay, that's cool. Because I think so oftentimes we are focused on the poses, and then as soon as you're off the mat, I can't tell you how many times I hear this too, like, I wish I could just stay on my yoga mat all day long because I feel great when I'm on my mat practicing, but as soon as I come off my mat, I'm dysregulated. But maybe if we had a deeper understanding that yoga is actually kind of like fertilizing our soil to not be so reactive.
And I think it's important to know that yoga asana shouldn't always be comfortable, because if it's always comfortable, then we're not hitting our edges. We're not experiencing the vrittis. So the purpose of this practice is to illuminate the negative thought patterns, the self-limiting beliefs, and the samskaras, the conditioned habits. So it's like, sit here and look at this shit. Sorry, am I allowed? Yeah, look at this shit.
You're not the first.
Look at it. And then can you be with it and sit in this uncomfortable place and find comfort, ease, steadiness, and focus. And then the next time you're with your partner and you're having a tough conversation, can you sit present with ease, comfort in that difficult situation? So it's a toning of the nervous system, and it's really it's a remembering of that which we have always known. And so I have a 1-year-old right now, and I feel, this is like the world that I'm living in right now, witnessing this. And when he was, I can't remember how old, I want to say 5 months, I was reading some child psychology stuff. And they were saying that separation anxiety occurs when the kid or the baby starts to realize that they are not one with the mom. Yeah. So that is, with my yoga lens, this is how I look at it, in the sense of yoga is teaching us that we're one with all things. And if I feel like my pain is pain, hurt is hurt, our stories are different, but the connectivity is one of those feelings. So we are born into this world knowing that we are all one. And then we forget that because different parts of our brain develop. And as those parts of our brain develop, we feel this separation. And it actually is a point of child development where they notice that the baby doesn't think it's one with the mom anymore. Yeah, sure. And so yoga is teaching us that which we have always known. That we have, the true brilliance inside of us if we dust it off every once in a while and let it shine.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is cool, which is a whole nother layer of practice that it's not about how flexible you are, how far you can get your hands underneath your feet.
Richard Freeman, who's an incredible yogini, true guru of our age, says that blessed are the unflexible because they can really feel the poses.
Oh, isn't that funny?
But yeah, we've really hooked on to this idea that yoga is the physical. And yes, it's very beautiful. And, we live in a very materialistic world. So of course it's kind of grabbed hold of that. But I like to always, remind people that the deeper that we go in our practice, yoga reveals itself to us. So if we stay consistent with our practice, we can trust that the system is doing us, right? We show up with devotion, and these are the two wings of yoga: devotion, true, and consistency, but not attachment to the goal. And that's not an easy thing to show up every day with, but if we do that with consistency, it is a science. It's a science of the nervous system. It's a science of the rewiring of the thoughts. And as we show up, it does us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do yoga.
Do yoga to be in relationship with your inner critic in a different way, because this is just it, right? I think so many of us, we're so used to these voices in our head and this constant self-talk that's often negative, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to escape from it. But it seems like yoga is one avenue where it's not about escaping from it, but being present to it, and that inherently turns down the volume.
Very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. So a couple tools. So in Ashtanga Yoga, it's called the Yoga Tristana, the three main aspects of Ashtanga Yoga. And it's when you're doing your practice that the mind is constantly running around, right? And we want to reel it in. And so we can use the tools to assist that. So one thing would be steadying your gaze. So if you're sitting in meditation, or if you are in a yoga pose, and each posture has a traditional gazing point, but don't worry about that from the get-go. Let the eyes be focused and locked. That automatically will turn down the volume of the mind. Then let it be a breathing practice first and foremost. And the Ujjayi Pranayama breath, which is the audible, victorious breath of a contraction in the back of the throat, captures our attention because we can hear it. So then the process of just those two things, pairing them up, automatically make us go inward. And that is going to do a lot of work on the nervous system, right there. And as the nervous system starts to turn down and turn off, then the vrittis start to change, because the chitter chatter, the state of the mind is a direct reflection of the state of the nervous system. So if we want to access the mind, we've got to access the nervous system. That's kind of your tangible way to do it.
Okay, cool. We had a question, what books or resources would
tons.
be helpful for a beginner?
Yeah, so let me just
Thanks,
say
Rich.
this, when you are diving into yoga philosophy, it can be a little heady.
Yeah.
So read it a lot, put it next to the bathroom, ponder through it. Yeah. So one book that...
A couple lines at a time, right?
Yeah,
rather
totally.
than like, let me get through 20 pages.
Some of them are more so than others. And the first one is, this is a really good kind of quicker read in yoga philosophy, Darian Main, The Path of the Urban Mystic. And he goes through the 8 limbs of yoga, and I really like it because I think it gives great modern day examples. Easy read. Light on Life, which is B.K.S. Iyengar, is a yoga classic. And then there are tons of different translations. So this Yoga Sutras, yoga's not a religion, but if it were, it would be the Bible of yoga. That's a good way to just kind of give it a reference. And sutra is a type of literature that's basically like bullet points. And so there's, I think, 196, I should know that off the top of my head, 196 sutras, and they're each bullet points. And so what the sutras will be the Sanskrit, the English translation, and then the author of them will create a passage or two on their explanation of the sutras. So if you type in Yoga Sutras into Amazon, there's tons and tons out there. There's short little ones, there's humongous ones. What one of the teachers that I have studied with suggests is to get, if you're really serious about this, to get about 5 copies and then just, pick a couple sutras at a time and compare and contrast which definition works well for you, and it will for, a couple years, and then all of a sudden you hear something else and you're like, oh wow, that just opened a whole new door for it. So it's a never-ending learning. But I think that a really, kind of coming back to yoga is in its infancy here in the United States. And as it grows and as it expands, we're going to see more of this traditional lineage-based, hopefully deeper aspects of yoga come forth, where it's not not all about the poses, because the poses are 1/8 of this practice, and they're really just a container for all of this practice. It's a lifestyle-based practice. Key word, practice, not mastery.
Right. Over and over and over
And over.
And coming back to it.
Every moment it asks us to show up and practice. So.
Well, I'll go ahead and post Sarah's website, which is wholehealthlab.com. So if you want to learn a little bit more from Sarah, she's an amazing, amazing teacher. And super, super fun to work with. So, and I really just has brought a whole nother, just my depth of understanding of yoga has sunk by 20, just from taking her classes regularly. And it wasn't 101, it was just going to her classes regularly and then going to a semi-private class, which was really great. So that's another option, to do that with. If you want to dive a little deeper about how to, be nicer to yourself and some strategies around kind of working with that inner critic and being a better friend to yourself, I'll post the link for a program I'm running in a couple of weeks as we're going to start. So if you want to jump in and join us for that, we'd love to have you. Thanks, Sarah, for being here.
Thank
It's
you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks
care.
so much. Be well.